The snow was falling heavily outside the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago that December evening, creating a picturesque winter scene that contrasted sharply with the warmth and excitement inside the elegantly appointed ballroom. The annual holiday dinner for Morrison and Associates was in full swing, with nearly 200 employees and their guests celebrating what had been the company's most successful year in its 20-year history. Sarah Chan adjusted her black blazer nervously as she surveyed the room filled with her colleagues, all dressed in their finest attire for what was supposed to be a celebration of collective achievement and individual recognition. The ballroom itself was a testament to the company's success, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables draped in crisp white linens and adorned with sophisticated centerpieces of winter flowers and flickering candles. The catering was exceptional, featuring a menu that had been carefully selected to accommodate the diverse dietary preferences of the staff, from traditional holiday fare to contemporary fusion dishes that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of their Chicago location. Sarah had been working at the mid-sized consulting firm for 7 years, a journey that had taken her from a nervous junior analyst fresh out of Northwestern University's business school to her current position as senior project manager. The path hadn't always been smooth, with late nights spent mastering complex analytical frameworks, weekend hours dedicated to understanding industry trends, and countless presentations delivered to clients whose demands seemed to grow more sophisticated with each passing year. She prided herself on her dedication, often staying late to ensure every detail was perfect, covering for colleagues when they were overwhelmed by competing deadlines, and consistently delivering results that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations set by senior management. The past 12 months had been particularly remarkable for Sarah. She had successfully led the strategic transformation of Hartwell Industries' supply chain operations, a project that had initially seemed impossible when the client's existing systems had proven to be far more outdated and inefficient than anyone had anticipated. Through innovative thinking and tireless collaboration with both her internal team and the client's staff, Sarah had developed a comprehensive solution that not only addressed the immediate operational challenges but also positioned Hartwell for sustainable growth over the next decade. The coastal development project had been another triumph, requiring Sarah to navigate complex regulatory requirements while designing a framework that balanced environmental concerns with economic viability. The client had been facing potential legal challenges that could have resulted in millions of dollars in fines and project delays. But Sarah's strategic approach had transformed those obstacles into competitive advantages that actually enhanced the project's profitability and community acceptance. Tonight, she hoped, would be different from previous company celebrations where her contributions had been acknowledged quietly in private conversations but not recognized publicly. Tonight, she expected some recognition for the incredible year she'd had, leading 3 major client projects that brought in over $2 million in revenue for the firm. The financial impact was significant, but Sarah was equally proud of the professional relationships she had built with clients who had specifically requested her involvement in future engagements. If you're enjoying this story of workplace dynamics and unexpected turns, please subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real-life stories like this one. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The evening had started pleasantly enough, with Sarah arriving at the hotel just as the Chicago Symphony Orchestra musicians hired for the event were beginning their elegant interpretations of holiday classics, mixed with contemporary jazz standards. She mingled with her coworkers, sharing stories about recent projects and holiday plans, exchanging business cards with colleagues from other regional offices whom she rarely had the opportunity to meet in person. The ballroom was decorated with elegant gold and silver ornaments that caught and reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers, and the catering was exceptional: prime rib carved to order, Atlantic salmon prepared with herb crusts, and an impressive selection of desserts that included both traditional holiday treats and modern pastry creations that reflected the company's successful year. The guest list represented the full spectrum of Morrison and Associates operations, from junior analysts in their first year with the company to senior partners who had helped build the firm from its modest beginnings in a shared office space to its current position as one of the Midwest's most respected consulting practices. Sarah recognized faces from the New York office, colleagues from the smaller Detroit satellite location, and several board members whose presence indicated that tonight's celebration was particularly significant for the company's leadership. The atmosphere was festive and sophisticated, with soft jazz playing in the background and the gentle clinking of wine glasses creating a soundtrack that spoke to professional success and collegial camaraderie. Conversation flowed easily between tables, with people moving freely around the ballroom to connect with colleagues they might not see regularly in their day-to-day operations. Sarah particularly enjoyed catching up with Maria Santos from the Detroit office, who had been working on a fascinating urban development project that shared some strategic similarities with Sarah's recent work in sustainable business practices. Sarah's immediate supervisor, Richard Blackwood, was holding court at one of the central tables, positioned strategically where he could observe most of the ballroom's activity while regaling a group of junior employees with stories of his early days at the company. Richard was a man in his late 50s, with perfectly styled graying hair and an expensive Italian suit that spoke to his position as regional director and his understanding of the importance of professional presentation in client-facing situations. He had been with Morrison & Associates for 15 years, joining the firm during a period of rapid expansion that had established many of the operational systems and client relationships that still formed the backbone of their current success. Richard had a reputation throughout the company for being both demanding and results-oriented, someone who set high standards for his team and expected those standards to be met consistently and without excuse. He was known for his ability to identify inefficiencies in client operations and for his skill at presenting complex solutions in ways that executive-level decision-makers could quickly understand and approve. Sarah had worked directly under him for the past 3 years, and their relationship had always been professionally cordial, though she sometimes felt he didn't fully appreciate the scope of her contributions or understand the level of strategic thinking that went into the solutions she developed. As the evening progressed and the carefully selected wine collection flowed more freely, the atmosphere became increasingly relaxed, with conversation becoming more animated and personal connections strengthening between colleagues who typically interacted only in formal business settings. The company president, Margaret Morrison herself, took the stage to deliver the annual address, her presence commanding immediate attention from every person in the ballroom. Margaret was a formidable figure in the consulting industry, having built Morrison & Associates from a small partnership into a regional powerhouse through a combination of strategic vision, operational excellence, and an unwavering commitment to client satisfaction. Her address was comprehensive and inspiring, praising the team's achievements in securing major new clients, expanding service offerings into emerging markets, and maintaining the highest standards of professional excellence even while growing rapidly. She outlined ambitious goals for the coming year, including plans for international expansion, investment in cutting-edge technology platforms, and the development of specialized practice areas that would position the firm at the forefront of industry innovation. Sarah listened intently, hoping to hear her name mentioned among the year's standout performers, particularly given the significant revenue her projects had generated and the positive feedback she had received from multiple clients. When Margaret concluded her remarks without any individual recognition beyond general acknowledgments of team effort, Sarah felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but she reminded herself that her work spoke for itself and that recognition would come in time. She had learned over the years that the most meaningful validation often came from clients and colleagues rather than formal ceremonies, and she took comfort in knowing that her contributions were valued by the people who worked closely with her on complex projects. The real trouble began when Richard stood up at his table, clearly emboldened by several glasses of the premium wine that Morrison & Associates had spared no expense to provide for the evening's celebration. The wine selection had been impressive, featuring selections from renowned vineyards in California, France, and Italy, chosen specifically to complement the sophisticated menu and create an atmosphere of celebration and success. However, Richard's consumption had apparently exceeded his usual moderate approach to alcohol at professional events. The conversation at nearby tables gradually died down as people noticed Richard's increasingly animated gestures and raised voice, his usually controlled demeanor giving way to something more expansive and less filtered than anyone was accustomed to seeing from him in professional settings. Sarah, who was seated 2 tables away with some of her project team members including Michael Torres and Jessica Martinez, felt an uncomfortable knot forming in her stomach as she realized Richard was pointing in her general direction while making increasingly emphatic statements about business leadership and professional development. "You know what the problem is with young professionals today?" Richard announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the confidence of someone who had perhaps enjoyed the open bar a bit too enthusiastically. They think they understand the business after a few successful projects, but they don't see the big picture. They don't understand that there's a difference between doing the work and actually leading. Sarah's colleagues at her table exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jessica Martinez, one of the junior analysts, whispered, "Is he talking about someone specific?" Sarah forced a smile and shrugged, though her heart was beginning to race. She had a sinking feeling about where this might be heading. Richard continued, now clearly warming to his theme and apparently enjoying what he perceived to be an attentive audience. Take Sarah Chun, for example. The mention of her name caused several heads to turn in Sarah's direction, and she felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment as the attention of dozens of her colleagues suddenly focused on her. She's been doing excellent work. Don't get me wrong. Her attention to detail is absolutely impressive, and she's certainly reliable. Probably the most reliable person on my team, actually. But at the end of the day, when you strip away all the complexity and look at the fundamental structure of what she does, she's support staff. She executes what others envision. She's not leadership material, and that's perfectly okay. Not everyone can be a strategic leader, and the company needs people who can handle the implementation side of what we do. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the continued sounds of the jazz ensemble, who appeared to be oblivious to the drama unfolding in their audience. Sarah felt as though the elegant ballroom had suddenly become a spotlight focused entirely on her, with dozens of her colleagues now looking between her and Richard with expressions ranging from sympathy to uncomfortable curiosity to barely concealed outrage on her behalf. The jazz music continued playing, but it seemed distant and surreal, as though she were watching the scene unfold from outside her own body, like a movie in which she was unwillingly playing the lead role. Michael Torres, one of Sarah's closest colleagues and a fellow senior project manager who had worked with her on multiple complex engagements over the past 2 years, looked across the room at her with obvious concern and what appeared to be growing anger at Richard's public assessment. He had worked with Sarah on the challenging Hartwell Industries project and knew firsthand not only the quality of her strategic thinking and leadership capabilities, but also the way clients responded to her insights and trusted her judgment in making critical business decisions. The Hartwell Industries project, which had been their biggest success of the year in terms of both revenue generation and client satisfaction, had been largely Sarah's vision from the initial client meeting through the final implementation phases, though Richard had consistently positioned himself as the lead strategist during client presentations and in internal performance reviews. "I mean, let's be honest," Richard continued, apparently unaware of the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere his words were creating. "Sarah works hard. I'll give her that. She stays late. She dotted every I and crosses every T. But there's a difference between being a good worker and being executive material. She lacks the gravitas, the presence that real leadership requires. She's more comfortable in the background, supporting the people who actually drive the business forward." Sarah's project team members were now looking at her with expressions of disbelief and anger on her behalf. Tom Patterson, a junior consultant who had benefited from Sarah's mentorship over the past year, started to stand up, apparently ready to defend her, but Sarah caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. The last thing she wanted was to turn this into a larger scene that would overshadow the entire evening. Margaret Morrison, who had been chatting with some board members near the stage, had clearly noticed the disturbance and was making her way across the ballroom with a concerned expression. Sarah watched her approach, wondering if this evening could possibly get any more mortifying. She considered quietly excusing herself and slipping out of the ballroom, perhaps claiming a sudden illness, but something kept her rooted to her chair. The weather outside seemed to match the chill that had settled over Sarah's section of the room. Through the large windows, she could see the snow continuing to fall, coating the streets of downtown Chicago in a pristine white blanket that made everything look clean and new. She found herself wishing she could step outside into that fresh snow and leave this entire embarrassing situation behind. Richard, seemingly oblivious to the impact of his words, raised his wine glass in what appeared to be a mock toast. "Here's to all our support staff," he declared with a smile that Sarah could only describe as condescending. "We couldn't do what we do without people like Sarah handling the details, while the real leaders focus on strategy and client relationships." The comment stung more than Sarah cared to admit. Over the past 3 years, She had been the primary strategist on several major accounts, developing innovative solutions that had not only retained clients but expanded their contracts significantly. The Hartwell Industries deal, which Richard loved to reference in his own performance reviews, had been built on a framework that Sarah had designed from the ground up. The client had specifically requested her involvement in future projects, though those requests typically went through Richard, who positioned himself as the account lead. Margaret Morrison had now reached Richard's table, and Sarah could see her speaking quietly but firmly to him. Richard's expression shifted from confident to confused, and then to something approaching concern. Other senior executives were beginning to converge on the area, and Sarah realized that this situation was rapidly escalating beyond a simple case of poor judgment fueled by holiday wine. "Richard," Margaret's voice carried clearly across the now quiet ballroom, "I think we need to have a conversation. Perhaps we should step outside for a moment." Her tone was professional but unmistakably firm, the voice of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations and strong personalities. But Richard, apparently misreading the situation entirely, waved off her suggestion. "Oh, come on, Margaret. I'm just being honest about team dynamics. Sarah knows I think highly of her work within her role. There's nothing wrong with being great at what you do, even if what you do is support rather than leadership." The second use of the word support seemed to galvanize something in the room. Sarah noticed that several of her colleagues were now openly scowling at Richard, and she could hear murmured conversations starting up at various tables. Jessica Martinez leaned over to whisper to her, "This is completely unprofessional. Everyone knows you've been carrying half his workload." Margaret Morrison's expression had hardened considerably. "Richard, I'm going to ask you once more to step outside with me. This conversation is inappropriate for this setting, and you're making statements that are not only inaccurate but potentially damaging to team morale." For the first time, Richard seemed to recognize that he might have crossed a line. He looked around the ballroom, perhaps finally noticing the uncomfortable silence and the dozens of eyes focused on him. His confident demeanor faltered slightly, and Sarah could see him beginning to realize that his honest assessment had not been received as he had apparently intended. I was just sharing my perspective on team roles and responsibilities," Richard said, his voice now noticeably less confident. "I didn't mean any offense. Sarah is a valued member of our team, of course." "Richard," Margaret's voice cut through his attempted backtracking with surgical precision. "Outside. Now." As Richard reluctantly followed Margaret toward a side door that led to a private meeting room adjacent to the ballroom, Sarah felt the eyes of the entire room on her. The jazz ensemble, apparently sensing the tension, had switched to a more subdued selection, and the waitstaff had diplomatically begun refilling wine glasses and encouraging people to visit the dessert station. Michael Torres appeared at Sarah's side, having crossed the room during the confrontation. "Sarah, I am so sorry about that. That was completely out of line, and everyone here knows it." Sarah managed a weak smile. "It's okay, Michael. I think Richard just had a bit too much wine. These things happen at company parties." But even as she said the words, Sarah didn't believe them herself. Richard's comments had felt too specific, too detailed to be simply the result of holiday overindulgence. There had been something almost calculated about the way he had diminished her contributions, reducing years of strategic work and leadership to support functions. Tom Patterson, the junior consultant she had mentored, was now standing behind Michael with an expression of barely contained anger. "Sarah, that was bullshit and everyone knows it. The Hartwell project was your baby from day one. Hell, half the innovations we've implemented this year came from your strategic planning sessions." "Tom's right," added Jessica Martinez. "Remember the Coastal Development Project? You completely restructured their operational framework, and it saved them $3 million annually. That's not support work, that's executive-level strategic consulting." As her colleagues rallied around her with words of support and outrage on her behalf, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. She was grateful for their loyalty and their recognition of her contributions, but she was also deeply embarrassed by the public nature of Richard's criticism. More than that, She was hurt by the realization that this might reflect his genuine assessment of her capabilities and her place within the organization. The side door through which Margaret and Richard had disappeared remained firmly closed, but Sarah could occasionally hear the murmur of intense conversation from beyond it. She wondered what exactly was being discussed and whether this incident would have lasting repercussions for her career at Morrison & Associates. Richard was, after all, her direct supervisor and had significant influence over her performance evaluations and advancement opportunities. "You know what really gets me," Michael was saying, keeping his voice low but with obvious frustration, "is that Richard takes credit for your strategic insights in client meetings, and then has the audacity to call you support staff in front of the entire company." Sarah had noticed this pattern over the past year. During internal strategy sessions, Richard would often defer to her expertise and rely heavily on her analysis and recommendations. But when it came to client presentations or discussions with senior management, he positioned himself as the strategic visionary while Sarah was relegated to handling implementation details, even when those details included the core innovations that made their solutions successful. The ballroom had begun to return to something approaching normal conversation levels, though Sarah noticed that people kept glancing in her direction with expressions of sympathy and concern. The dessert station was indeed busy, and she could see several of her colleagues engaged in what appeared to be heated discussions about what they had just witnessed. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, the side door opened and Margaret Morrison emerged alone. Richard was nowhere to be seen, and Margaret's expression was professionally neutral, but with an underlying steel that suggested the conversation had not gone well for him. Margaret walked directly to Sarah's table, and the conversations around them immediately died down as people strained to hear what would be said next. Sarah felt her heart racing again, unsure whether she was about to be drawn into the conflict or somehow blamed for the disruption of the evening. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom, "would you mind joining me for a brief conversation? There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." Sarah nodded, trying to project calm professionalism despite the turmoil she was feeling internally. She followed Margaret toward a different side door, this one leading to what she knew was a small executive conference room that was sometimes used for private meetings during company events. The conference room was elegantly appointed with a polished mahogany table and comfortable leather chairs, but Sarah barely noticed the decor as she took a seat across from Margaret. Through the room's windows, she could see that the snow was still falling steadily, and the city lights created a beautiful but somehow melancholy scene. "Sarah," Margaret began, her tone much warmer than it had been when addressing Richard. "First, I want to apologize for what just happened out there. Richard's comments were completely inappropriate and do not reflect this company's values or assessment of your contributions." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that, though I hope this doesn't create any lasting problems within the team." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more focused. "Actually, Sarah, that brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss with you. The board and I have been conducting a comprehensive review of our regional operations, and your name has come up repeatedly in our discussions." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. "I hope that's a positive development." "Very positive," Margaret continued. "Your work on the Hartwell Industries account didn't go unnoticed. Neither did your strategic restructuring of the Coastal Development Project, or your leadership during the crisis management situation with Brennan Corporation last spring. The board has been particularly impressed with your ability to develop innovative solutions while maintaining strong client relationships." As Margaret spoke, Sarah found herself thinking back over the past year's projects with new perspective and a growing sense of validation for work that had sometimes felt underappreciated. She had indeed led the strategic development for most of the major accounts, developing innovative frameworks and solutions while Richard typically positioned himself as the primary client contact and public face of their team's achievements. She had developed the crisis management protocols that had saved the Brennan Corporation relationship when their original project scope had fallen apart due to unexpected regulatory changes that threatened to derail months of careful planning and relationship building. The Brennan situation had been particularly challenging because it had required not only technical expertise in regulatory compliance but also sophisticated diplomatic skills to manage the competing interests of multiple stakeholder groups while maintaining the client's confidence in Morrison and Associates' ability to deliver results. Sarah had worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks straight, collaborating with legal experts, regulatory specialists, and the client's internal teams to develop a solution that not only addressed the immediate compliance issues, but actually strengthened Brennan's market position relative to their competitors. More recently, the Midwest Manufacturing Consortium project had showcased Sarah's ability to think strategically about industry-wide challenges while developing solutions that could be implemented across multiple organizations with varying operational structures and cultural contexts. The project had required her to facilitate negotiations between competing companies, design collaborative frameworks that respected proprietary information while enabling productive cooperation, and create measurement systems that could demonstrate value to each participating organization's board of directors. The truth is, Sarah, we've been watching your career development closely, and we believe you're ready for significantly increased responsibilities. Margaret continued, her voice carrying a warmth and conviction that made Sarah feel truly seen and valued for the first time in years. Richard has decided to pursue other opportunities outside the company, effective immediately. The board and I would like to offer you his position as regional director, with all the responsibilities, authority, and compensation that the role entails. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. She sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard, while the sound of her own heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. Richard was leaving? She was being offered his position? After everything that had just happened in the ballroom, the reversal felt almost surreal, like something that might happen in a movie rather than in real life. The position represented not just a promotion but a fundamental transformation in her role within the organization and her ability to influence the strategic direction of their regional operations. Margaret, I'm honored by the offer, but I have to ask, is this decision related to what happened tonight? Margaret shook her head firmly. The decision was made last week, Sarah. Tonight's incident simply accelerated our timeline for making the announcement. We had originally planned to discuss this with you after the holidays, but circumstances have made it appropriate to move forward immediately. Sarah felt her mind racing through the implications of this unexpected opportunity, while simultaneously trying to process the emotional whiplash of going from public humiliation to career breakthrough in the span of just a few hours. Regional Director was a significant promotion that would place her among the senior leadership team, with responsibility for overseeing all client accounts in the Midwest region, managing a team of 12 professionals including several senior project managers, and serving on the executive committee that made strategic decisions about the company's future direction. The position would also involve representing Morrison and Associates at industry conferences, building relationships with potential clients at the C-suite level, and contributing to the development of new service offerings that could expand the firm's market presence. The financial implications were significant as well. The regional director position came with a substantial salary increase, performance-based bonuses tied to regional revenue targets, equity participation in the company's profit-sharing program, and access to professional development opportunities that could further enhance her capabilities and industry reputation. More importantly, the role would give her the authority to implement strategic initiatives she had been developing mentally for years, but had never been in a position to propose or execute. We've been concerned for some time about the disconnect between Richard's public presentations and the actual source of our strategic innovations. Margaret continued, her tone becoming more specific and frank than Sarah had ever heard in a professional conversation. The board's comprehensive review of our regional operations made it clear that much of the work he was taking credit for was actually originating from your analysis, strategic planning, and client relationship management. That disconnect is not sustainable from a leadership perspective, and it's not fair to you or to the other team members whose contributions have been similarly underrepresented. The validation felt overwhelming after years of wondering whether her contributions were truly recognized by senior leadership or if she was simply imagining a gap between her actual impact and the recognition she received. What would the timeline look like for this transition? And how would we handle the client relationships that Richard has been managing directly? We'd like you to start immediately, At least in an interim capacity while we finalize all the paperwork and complete the necessary legal documentation, Margaret replied. Your salary would be adjusted to reflect the new position effective with your next paycheck, along with the corresponding benefits package that includes enhanced health coverage, additional vacation time, and equity participation in our annual profit-sharing distribution. We can discuss all the specific details tomorrow when we have more time to go through the complete compensation package and organizational structure. Margaret pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it to reveal several documents that appeared to have been prepared in advance. I should mention that the board's decision wasn't made lightly or hastily. We've been conducting performance reviews and analyzing the actual contribution patterns for all of our senior staff over the past 6 months. Your name came up consistently as someone whose strategic thinking and leadership capabilities were not being fully utilized in your current role. Through the conference room windows, Sarah could see that the snow had begun to lighten, and the city lights were creating a magical pattern against the winter sky. The contrast with her mood an hour ago was stark, from public humiliation to career breakthrough in the span of a single conversation. Margaret, I'm definitely interested. This is an incredible opportunity, and I'm grateful for the confidence you're showing in me. The confidence is well-earned, Sarah. Your colleagues respect you, your clients specifically request your involvement, and your strategic thinking has been driving our success for the past 2 years. It's time that your role reflected those realities. As they discussed some of the preliminary details of the transition, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation that would need to happen with her team. Michael Torres and Tom Patterson would be thrilled, she knew. They had been advocating for her advancement for months, sometimes more openly than was probably politically wise. There is one more thing, Sarah, Margaret said as their conversation began to wind down. I'd like you to consider whether you want to return to the party tonight to make a brief announcement, or if you'd prefer to handle this more quietly through normal channels tomorrow. Sarah considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to slip away quietly, to process this dramatic turn of events in private and avoid any additional drama. But another part of her, the part that had been publicly diminished an hour ago, felt that her colleagues deserved to know that the situation had been addressed. I think I'd like to make a brief announcement tonight, if that's appropriate. My team has been very supportive, and they deserve to know that the company values their work and mine. Margaret smiled approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. It sends the right message about accountability and recognition. As they prepared to return to the ballroom, Sarah felt a sense of nervous excitement unlike anything she had experienced in years. The professional humiliation of Richard's comments had been transformed into a moment of vindication and opportunity. She thought about calling her parents in California to share the news, and about the strategic initiatives she could finally implement without having to filter them through Richard's more conservative approach. When they re-entered the ballroom, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere had remained somewhat subdued. Many of her colleagues were still clustered in small groups, and she could see Michael Torres scanning the room, apparently looking for her return. The dessert station was still busy, but there was an underlying tension that suggested people were still processing what had happened earlier. Margaret moved to the front of the room and gently tapped her wine glass with a spoon, calling for attention. The conversations gradually died down as people turned toward her, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nerves as dozens of eyes once again focused in her direction. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. I wanted to take a moment to address the earlier disruption and to share some important news about our team's future. The room fell completely silent, with even the jazz ensemble pausing between songs. Sarah could feel her heart beating faster as she prepared for whatever Margaret was about to say. First, I want to reiterate that Morrison & Associates values professionalism, respect, and accurate recognition of our team members' contributions. The comments made earlier this evening do not reflect our company's values, and they certainly don't reflect the reality of how our success is achieved. Sarah noticed several of her colleagues nodding approvingly, and she could see Tom Patterson with a satisfied expression that suggested he was pleased to see leadership addressing the situation directly. More importantly, Margaret continued, I'm delighted to announce that Sarah Chun has accepted the position of Regional Director, effective immediately. Sarah's strategic leadership and innovative thinking have been instrumental in our success over the past several years, and we're excited to see what she'll accomplish in this expanded role. The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic, with several people actually standing. Sarah felt tears of relief and gratitude welling up in her eyes as her colleagues celebrated her promotion. Michael Torres was grinning broadly and applauding vigorously, while Jessica Martinez was practically bouncing with excitement. As the applause continued, Sarah stepped forward to address her colleagues. "Thank you all so much for your support tonight and throughout my time here. I'm excited about this opportunity to work more closely with all of you to continue building on our success. This promotion isn't just about individual recognition. It's about the incredible team we have here and what we can accomplish together." The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people approaching to congratulate her and express their enthusiasm about working under her leadership. Tom Patterson was among the first to reach her, his earlier anger at Richard's comments now replaced with obvious joy at the turn of events. "Sarah, this is incredible. I can't wait to see what changes you'll implement. Maybe now we can finally get approval for that client portal system you've been proposing." Michael Torres joined them with a huge grin. "I have to admit, when I saw Richard making those comments, I was worried about how this would affect team morale. I never imagined it would lead to this. It's about time the company recognized what everyone else has known for years." As the evening wound down and people began making their way toward the coat check, Sarah found herself reflecting on the dramatic arc of the night. What had begun as a routine company party had become a watershed moment in her career, transforming public humiliation into professional triumph in the span of just a few hours. The snow had stopped falling by the time Sarah retrieved her coat and stepped outside into the crisp Chicago night. The city looked clean and fresh under its blanket of snow, and she felt a sense of new beginnings that matched the transformed landscape. She pulled out her phone to call her parents and share the incredible news, knowing they would be proud but probably not entirely surprised. They had always believed in her capabilities, even when she had doubted them herself. As she waited for her rideshare, Sarah thought about Monday morning and the work that lay ahead. There would be client meetings to reschedule, strategic initiatives to prioritize, and a team to reorganize. But for the first time in years, she felt truly excited about the challenges ahead, knowing that she would finally have the authority to implement the changes she had been envisioning. The ride home through the snowy streets gave her time to process everything that had happened. Richard's public dismissal of her contributions had been painful and embarrassing, but it had also catalyzed a conversation that might have otherwise been delayed for months. In a strange way, his poor judgment had accelerated her career advancement by forcing the leadership team to address the disconnect between perception and reality regarding her role in the company's success. Sarah thought about the projects she would now be able to pursue, the strategic direction she could set for the regional office, and the opportunity to create a more collaborative and innovative culture. She also thought about the responsibility she now had to her team members, many of whom had supported her through difficult moments and deserved to work in an environment where their contributions were accurately recognized and valued. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah had begun mentally drafting the strategic plan she would present to the leadership team in her first week as regional director. The Hartwell Industries account could be expanded into new service areas, the coastal development relationship could be leveraged for referrals, and the lessons learned from the Brennan Corporation crisis could be systematized into protocols for future use. As she settled into her living room with a cup of tea, looking out at the snow-covered city, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. The holiday dinner had indeed been memorable, though certainly not in the way she had expected when she had nervously adjusted her blazer in the hotel ballroom just a few hours earlier. Sometimes the most challenging moments create the opportunities for the most significant positive changes, and tonight had certainly proven that principle in the most dramatic way possible.